Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Chittenden 17 Candidate Forum. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight at the Lake Champlain Community Sailing Center for this forum. I really appreciate you coming out on this Monday night. My name is Dan Fingus. I'm the Climate Action Coordinator for Vermont Conservation Voters. We're happy to have both candidates tonight for the Chittenden 17 State House race, both progressive Missa Aloisi and Democratic candidate Representative Abby Duke. Tonight's forum is co-sponsored along with Vermont Conservation Voters by VPIRG, Vermont Education Association, and Rights and Democracy. The forum will cover a diverse set of topics from environmental priorities to education funding to housing rights to protecting our democracy. We are very fortunate to have Charlie from Town Meeting TV here recording and live streaming the forum. Thank you, Town Meeting TV. Please look for the recording on their website from today onward. I want to pause before we begin and remind you all to vote. Obviously, we're here for a candidate forum. It's very important that everyone votes. Every registered voter should have gotten a mail-in ballot by now. If you have not, please contact the city clerk. Your closest ballot drop-off is at Fire Station number 2, located at 132 North Avenue. And election day is Tuesday, November 5th. Polls are open from 7 to 7. So everyone has lots of opportunity to vote. Today's forum will have opening and closing statements and then prearranged questions from our sponsor groups. And we will have time for audience questions near the end if there are any. Evelyn, over here, will be timekeeping so that everyone makes sure we stay on time. Every answer is going to be 2 minutes. And for you all, she'll show 30 seconds, 10 seconds, and stop. We will alternate which candidates goes first for each question. All right, let's get to the forum. We will start with opening statements from our candidates and start with Missa.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to have this forum. I'm running for office because I believe there needs to be more people like myself in the State House. I am a queer parent of an 11 and 7-year-old. I'm also a sole entrepreneur. I left the world of corporate architecture 11 years ago to start my own architectural practice to make architecture affordable and approachable to homeowners. So every day I go into people's homes and I ask them what do they need and how can I help? And I see this work is very transferable. Then after I ask them what they need and how can I help, I usually gather together a team of people. So I work with all sorts of engineers and we then come negotiate an outcome. We focus on the budget a lot and then finally reach a common goal. In the past couple years, the affordability has been a big issue. And before Emma left office, I started to do a little bit of work to bring homeowner protections into the legislation. We got a bill written to at least have builders be registered. So I'd like to continue that work. I also served on Burlington's Development Review Board and Montpelier's Planning Commission. And in the board itself, I've been part of mediation processes within the neighborhoods to work with, it was Eagles Landing, to help negotiate an outcome for Eagles Landing, which was with Champlain College. So I have that experience in terms of helping negotiate an outcome of a project in the city. So I look forward to bringing this unique skill set to the State House. Thanks.
Next, we'll have Abby.
Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you to our hosts for putting this on and all of you for coming. We are facing deep interconnected problems, and I believe that I have the skills, experience, and temperament to help in finding solutions in Montpelier. I grew up in the Midwest, and I made my way to Vermont in my 20s, expecting to be here for a year or two, but it turns out Vermont's a really nice place to live. So I stayed. I worked as a field biology technician, a newspaper reporter, a marketer, but then I really decided I just wanted to follow my dream, and I opened a business that involved an Intervale farm and selling its end product. I started Sugar Snap from scratch in 2003 with virtually no capital. I learned how to hire people, do bookkeeping, file permits, bring in customers, make hundreds of sandwiches, grow, process, and freeze 2 tons of winter squash, and most importantly, how to constantly learn, hustle, and adapt. Meanwhile, I settled into Vermont. I had a civil union. We had 2 kids who are currently both students at Burlington High School. Almost 21 years after its launch, my business is strong, stable, and successful. I employ 7 year-round employees who all receive benefits, excellent wages, and profit sharing. The shortest tenure of those 7 is 4 years. But the history of my business is not a straight line. I had very lean and difficult years. For about 5 years, when my 2 kids were small, it was an incredible struggle. At home, we relied on Dr. Dinosaur for insurance, a sliding scale at my kids' amazing child care center, and a simple budget: spend no money. At work, I got tremendous technical assistance and sometimes emotional support from mentors and through some state-supported organizations like the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, Intervale Center, SBDC, and the SBA. I do not take my success for granted, and it feels special, and it feels hard-won. And now I want to serve in the legislature to give back to my community and use those hard-won lessons. We'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you both. We'll jump into the first question. This past year, the legislature passed major environmental legislation, including modernizing the renewable energy standard, creating a first-in-the-nation climate superfund, responding to the devastating floods of 2023 with the Flood Safety Act, modernizing Act 250 to prioritize both conservation and making it easier to build housing in population centers and downtowns. Please reflect on those bills and tell us what your climate priorities are moving forward. We'll have Abby and then Missa.
Thank you. The legislature did a tremendous amount in the past 2 years, focusing on climate. And I think going into this next year, we need to focus on a few things. One is the clean heat standard and implementing a law or policies that are cost effective, that are equitable, and that reduce our emissions. And I think a huge focus of the time focus on climate needs to be on that, on the clean heat standard. Number 2, transportation. And we need to invest in Green Mountain Transit and look at our public transportation, which is struggling, and we need to look at our public transportation infrastructure and what can we do to help it. And the third piece I would say is we really need to focus on oversight. And that's a really important role of the legislature. Is not just passing policies and passing laws, but also providing oversight to make sure they're being implemented in a timely way and being implemented correctly.
Great. When I think about the climate crisis in Vermont, I think about 2 things. I think about the floodings that are going to happen yearly now, and the summer's getting warmer and warmer. And when I think about the floodings that happen, I think about the watersheds in Vermont and how important the watersheds are in really working to protect them, because not only do we need them to mitigate floodwaters, they can help reduce peak flows, but also it's our water to keep it clean, so that way we can swim in the lake when it's hot out. And as a farmer, I grew up on a farm. And I know a lot of those waterways go through a lot of rural places in Vermont, including farms. And right now we're putting a lot of pressure on farms to mitigate those waterways. And I think there's a missed opportunity that maybe we could work on, is really kind of working with farmers and the state level to take some of the responsibility off of those waterways. So that way we can really work at, again, mitigating floods. The other thing, so land use, I guess, is one of my big priorities. And as an architect, I do appreciate the work that's been done with Act 250. I've done projects in Burlington where I've had to apply for Act 250, and I thought that was a little much for infill housing. And the other thing is just energy efficiency. So as an architect, it's really important, when I think about cooling, that we talk about insulation for heating, but we also need to talk about it for cooling. You need to insulate a building properly in order to reduce energy load. So those are the 2 things that I would really focus on for my climate priorities.
All right. Vermont's prison system has some of the worst racial disparities in the country, incarcerating black people at more than 7 times the rate of white people. What policies would you propose to address the systemic racism and eliminate the racial disparities that exist in our criminal legal system? We'll start with Missa and then go to Abby.
Seltzer was a bad choice. I'm burping. So racism in America is, it's in our water. It's everywhere. We have systemic racism everywhere, and we need to become aware of our biases. So, and that includes law enforcement. I think one of the first things we could do is really kind of make sure that our law enforcement has proper training when it comes to bias, so that way we don't have pretextual stops and that sort of thing. That we do safety stops only, and that we're not stopping people based on race. So we need to understand that racism in our culture is subconscious. It's something that we constantly have to fight against. The other thing is, the Justice Reinvestment Initiative recommended a lot of things that we have yet to do. So it would be good to kind of go through that and follow up on those things. And lastly, I live across the street from the fire station, number 2 fire station, where you're going to put in your ballots. There's also a lot of police officers there, but we have a predominantly white police force and first responder force, and very few women in there. So we need to, as a state, look at how we recruit folks and make sure that we eliminate the barriers to get minorities and women into those positions. Because once you can see people in those, once you have people of color and minorities in those positions, the dynamic of those roles change. Thank you.
To start with, I think we have reports, we have the data, we know it's a problem. We know, in particular, it's a problem in Vermont. And we also have reports with the one that Missa referenced, with recommendations for how we can improve. So I think we really need to be focusing on implementation of recommendations, and also following data and seeing what's working. I voted for the veto override to increase investment, to bring more restorative justice programs statewide. I think restorative justice is an important piece. I think exploring more alternatives to incarceration, investing in mental health supports, and also social workers, such as the CSLs at the Burlington Police Department. And a really important key is the recruitment, retention, and training of officers, both at the local level and for state police. And I think having some kind of a statewide system to help with that certainly makes sense. I know there's the Democratic city councilors have passed a resolution that is asking for a deep report looking at retention and how we're recruiting officers. So I think this is one of those situations where we need to look at every step along the process and look at how we can improve everywhere.
Thank you both. Okay, on to an education question. Vermont's public schools are the cornerstone of our communities. They are also where educators put students first every day. We know that many kids and families are struggling, especially in the post-pandemic world. As a result, more students are coming to school with ever-growing and complex needs. Our public schools work hard to meet these complex and sometimes basic needs so students can feel safe and still be able to learn. However, addressing those needs comes at a cost borne by local school boards that used to be covered by other parts of state government. Still, understandably, many Vermonters are frustrated with how we fund our education system. Do you support eliminating the residential education property tax and moving to a progressive income tax where the wealthy pay their fair share? What other ideas do you have for fixing our education funding system that would not limit educational opportunities for kids? And we'll start with Abby.
So number one, I'm a huge supporter of our public schools. I have 2 kids who have gone through the Burlington public school system and are currently at Burlington High School. They've had tremendous educators through the years. people often ask them, like, what's it like going to school in a mall? And they get annoyed by the question because they're like, it's our school. And the teachers, it's the same teachers, right? And they've really managed to adapt the school to work for them while we're waiting for our beautiful new building to be built. So I think there's two pieces to this question. One is, how do we fund education? And clearly our current funding system does not work. Was built, I think, 27 years ago is the sort of the base of it, and we've had a variety of Band-Aids ever since. And we need to go back to the drawing board and find a new way to fund public education. Whether it is an income-based income tax, I don't know. I think we need to look at the numbers, really look at what makes the most sense. But I think we clearly need complete reform of the way that we fund education. And the other piece is really looking at how we deliver education. We have 645,000 people in the state and 50-some either supervisory unions or school districts with superintendents. And it seems like an awful lot of administration. And so I think a question is, how do we look at the structure of our system and how do we reform it to save money while still providing an outstanding education and the social services that schools are now expected to provide? I'm looking forward to what the Commission on the Future of Education comes back with. I'm looking forward to seeing what experts in the field recommend. But I do think that we need to take action for both the structure of the system as well as the way we fund it.
My wife is a paraeducator at Integrated Arts and the kindergarten classroom. And right now there are 11 open positions for paraeducators. And I didn't know what a paraeducator did before my wife became one. And they are vital for our classroom. They help kids who are in crisis, kids with extra needs or special needs, or that have learning plans that are mandated by law. And right now, starting wages for paraeducators, they make less than the crossing guard helping your child cross the street. So clearly the way we fund education and pay the people providing the education is broken. I did a little bit of digging. I think a thing that separates when I look at a problem like education, I try to look at it holistically, and I've developed these policy panels. And this one touches on property tax. But property tax is one thing that we can look at in terms of how we fund education. So right now in Burlington, in Vermont, we have 2 property tax tiers. Places like Hawaii have up to 9 to 12 different tiers. So we could really parse out who and how we tax in terms of property, and that could change the revenue in the state. But when I look at how our property tax, and it goes to education and it goes to our municipal budgets, and one of the biggest increases in our municipal budgets and education budget every year is healthcare costs. And we had some traction a few years ago for universal primary care, and that's low-hanging fruit. So primary care is different than single payer, saying that everybody can have access to a doctor, and that's something that in Vermont we can afford to do, and that would take the pressure off the municipalities and the education. So all of these things are closely linked. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Vermont has the lowest electricity rates and bills in New England because we have been prioritizing renewables and energy efficiency for 25 years. It's a huge success story. The legislature is now working to do the same efficiency and renewable work in the heating sector, but the fossil fuel industry, led by the ultra-conservative Koch network of organizations, are attacking them for it. The fossil fuel industry wants to keep things the way they are, no matter how much it costs Vermonters or damages the environment. What do you say to opponents of climate action in the face of the evidence that moving away from fossil fuels is good for Vermont's economy and environment? And will you vote to reauthorize the Affordable Heat Act, or also known as the Clean Heat Standard? And Missa is first.
Yes, I will work to authorizing the Affordable Heating Act. talk about my own experience. So when I started my practice 11 years ago, I used a lot of state safety nets to build my business. And one of those safety nets that I used was CVOEO's weatherization program. So I had newspaper in my attic, and that was the insulation in my attic. CVOEO came and did an analysis on my house, and they found vermiculite in my attic, in my kitchen attic, and they said, well, we're not going to provide insulation to your home unless you remediate the vermiculite. So vermiculite, if you don't know, contains 20% of it contains asbestos. So what I learned was we were the first one to then remediate our asbestos out of our vermiculite out of our attic, and they came in and they insulated our home. That is a barrier that's currently in place for low-income folks who apply for weatherization and they can't get it because of vermiculite. So because you have to then pay for that cost, and it's quite costly. So we need to kind of provide surrounding services for programs like CVOEO to do weatherization. So my goal is to kind of identify barriers that haven't been identified before through personal experience.
Thank you for the question. My household also benefited from efficiency programs. In 2019, we had a poorly insulated home with an old and inefficient boiler. In fact, so old, the Vermont Gas tagged it, and they said, we will not work on it. So we had to get a new furnace. Vermont Gas helped us with testing our home and connecting us with weatherization contractors to weatherize the house. We were able to use rebates and incentives, and also we refinanced our house in order to install solar panels and heat pumps. The total expense on all of that was about $60,000, but we spent about $40,000 by the time all the rebates and stuff got out. We were able to refinance that into our house. So amazing, right? More comfortable. Who knew that heat pumps provided AC? I didn't. We were shocked. And now with it's warmer in the summer, it's very helpful. So it's more comfortable. Our yearly expenses went down from about $4,000 to about $1,500 because we're using electric and even this is even not even in taking into account inflation and higher rates. So there's an economic benefit using local contractors and workers. So that's just a small story of the kinds of successes we can have with these projects. The clean heat standard, I really hope that a policy can come together that can be implemented and the legislature can come behind and support. I think it's very clear what the goals are, which is we want it to be cost effective, right? And we need to have safeguards in place and programs in place to make sure that it that it benefits and doesn't burden lower and middle class families, equitable, and it needs to lower emissions. So if all those things happen, then I think we can come together and implement the clean heat standard, and I'm hoping that will happen.
Thank you both. All right, next question's on housing rights. Vermont is in a housing crisis. The causes are complex and solutions need to be multi-pronged. 30% of Vermont households rent their homes. 4 municipalities, including the city of Burlington, have passed charter changes to adopt just cause eviction protections, but they haven't yet been approved by the legislature. If you are elected, would you support just cause eviction policies, and what other interventions would you support to make housing more affordable and accessible to all Vermonters? And we'll start with Abby.
Thank you. So to start, I support just cause eviction as long as there's built into the ability that for cause eviction can happen as well. So when there is somebody who needs to be evicted because of very specific things like breaking the law and the like, but I do support just cause eviction. We all know housing is a critical need in our society or in our community, and housing impacts every other challenge that we have. So I think we need to go all in and use kind of every tool we have to help people find housing. There's a few different ideas that I think can be explored. One is, how do we access our underutilized housing? When you look around, there's a lot of homes that are unoccupied, that are short-term rentals. Maybe they're only occupied a month out of the year, if it's a second home. There's also apartments that for a number of reasons, the owner who lives there decides not to rent. So I would like to see, how do we incentivize a better use of the underutilized homes that we have? For example, taxing short-term rentals at a higher rate, having different tiers of how we tax properties. Another thing is, from talking to neighbors and talking to people that I know, there's a lot of small landlords that aren't well supported in terms of how they run their operations, how they rent their apartments. And I think more supports for small landlords and more supports helping people to rent their homes would be a positive thing. And finally, we need to strengthen programs like Home Share Vermont, which provides a way for people to rent rooms in their homes, but in a way that feels very secure for them. So I encourage you to look at their website. And then there's more to it as well, but there's a lot. There's a lot of things on my list.
Housing is healthcare, end stop. And if we could provide housing, our healthcare is going to change. Our community safety is going to change. So when I think housing is healthcare, I think about UVM providing housing for its employees, which is definitely a need that they did and provided in South Burlington. But they used to provide affordable housing and fund people at need for housing. So they did temporary shelters and that sort of thing. We need to work with the hospitals again to incentivize them to fund more housing. It's in their best interest, in our best interest. It will reduce their own operational costs if we house the homeless. So that's one way. And then property tax is another way where if we did change the tiers from the two-tier system that we have, as I was talking about previously, to a multi-tiered system, then we can really parse out, again, who and how we're taxing. So in Hawaii, for example, they have a different tax bracket for affordable apartments versus regular apartments. They also have short-term rentals. We could have a vacant building property tax. So then we could really kind of incentivize providing more housing in Vermont. So those are the two things.
Thank you both. Abortion and reproductive liberty are constitutionally protected rights for Vermonters. However, there are ongoing attacks at the federal level, including attacks on access to contraception, medication abortion, gender-affirming care, IVF, and even emergency services. If we were to see a federal abortion ban, Vermont would see that right taken away. Given that and the ongoing financial hardships following COVID and stagnate Medicaid reimbursements in our state, how will you advocate for increased investment and protections in sexual and reproductive health care, including abortion? What else do you think is needed to strengthen or maintain abortion rights in our state? And we will start with Missa.
I'm very grateful that we live in a state where we passed the Reproduction Liberty Amendment and the SHIELD bill that protects providers in our state. I have permission to tell this story. My own mother, her first child she carried it to term. It was prior to ultrasounds, and it was the pregnancy was late. The baby didn't develop a brain, and she had to deliver the baby stillborn. And it breaks my heart knowing that there are women in the country that are doing that right now when they can have access to an abortion. And that I will fight endlessly so that people don't have to go through that sort of thing. What we can work on as a state that I think we still need to do is, again, identify barriers so people can get the care they need. So if we had universal primary care, that would open up the ability to pay people a standard service fee, so that way people in rural Vermont have access to doctors that they need. It would incentivize opening practices in more rural places, and that would increase the access so people could get the services they need to have an abortion or to get birth control. Thanks.
So I am really proud of our state legislature, who several years ago had the foresight to pass the constitutional amendment enshrining reproductive rights in our Constitution. Becca Ballant was a really important piece of the leadership of that, and I'm really pleased to have her support in this election. In Vermont, so a couple of things. One is we have a shield law that helps protect providers when somebody comes from another state for care. And I think we need to watch that and be in contact with providers and make sure that that law is effective and is being implemented correctly. We also need more OBGYNs, especially in rural areas. And so while we're having the discussion right now about the hospital system in our state, and we need to have in that looking at how do we maintain the OBGYN care through clinics, or if it's not going to be through the hospitals, and just making sure there's care is available throughout the state, and really looking at that Medicaid reimbursement, because I know that is a huge problem, and obviously that is a federal reimbursement, but I think as a state we need to help and look at OBGYN practices and clinics and see how we can help them be viable, especially for providing care throughout the state in our rural areas.
Thank you. Governor Phil Scott has used the most vetoes of any governor in Vermont's history and vetoed 8 major bills again this year, including important environmental, land use, and addiction treatment bills. Most of those bills were then overridden in the House and Senate, many times with tripartisan support. In addition, the governor has also shown that he is willing to ignore the advising consent function of the Senate in his reappointment of the acting Secretary of Education. As a representative, how will you approach working with a governor who continuously disregards the role of the legislature and its elected representatives and senators from across Vermont? And Appy's first.
Thank you. So in my business, and really, I have focused on collaboration. I've built my business and I've run my career in a win-win, the win-win kind of idea. So I want to work with another organization, and they're able to meet their needs, I'm able to meet my needs, and we all win together, right? So I would approach this in a not different way. Like, let's start with agreement. Let's look and also start early. I joined the legislature very late in the last week of the session, so I'm not sure how it all starts in December even, but I think we need more collaboration and earlier. I mean, talking to my colleagues in the House, they are talking right now about trying to get the House and the Senate together earlier and do some joint hearings where they can take testimony and work on collaboration before it's halfway through the session and it's getting to be too late. I think the same thing with the administration. Work early and focus on where you agree and build from there. I do think that Governor Scott can be good at identifying our problems and communicating them clearly. For example, he'll say the cost of living is too high. Vermonters can't afford to pay more. I think that's right. He'll also say we don't need more taxes. We need more taxpayers. Well, I think that's right too. However, his only strategy has been austerity. You can't expect things to get better. You can't expect things to change by essentially doing nothing or taking resources away. So investment is crucial, and we need to identify where investment is crucial and where we can agree with him and work early. Thank you.
The first thing I would do is, if elected, is work on all sorts of relationships. It's really important to build relationships, to build trust, and in doing so, you learn the values of those around you. I mentioned before, I grew up on a farm with a conservative father who we did not always agree. In fact, he was not in support of gay marriage when it came out. And we've had many, many hard, long conversations about that, and now he would do anything. In fact, my youngest is named after him. So he would do anything for them. So it's possible to come to a common goal and reach it. And I have that experience having grown up on a farm with a conservative father, and knowing how to reach across the aisle and find that commonality. In the world of architecture, the only way you move a project forward is if you can get support for it. And I have some training in public interest design, which is really about, again, relationship building. The most important part is gathering the information from people, making sure that their voices are heard, and then bringing that to the table and figuring out what our common goals are, and then working step by step. You may not, my job as an architect is to create a roadmap to a final goal. We may only get a quarter of the way there, but we've made progress in that direction. So I plan on having a lot of lunches with a lot of different people to build relationships.
All right, we've got one more prearranged question. I will remind everyone that we're going to take audience questions if there are any. So if you're thinking of one, we'll have an opportunity here in a second. And I'm sure that both of these candidates would love to hear what questions you have as well. Our last question is on democracy. On the federal level, we see continued attacks on our democracy from the January 6th insurrection and anti-democracy Supreme Court decisions. What is Vermont's role in strengthening our democracy, and what further legislation can we pass to ensure that Vermonters have their right to vote easily, accessible, and protected? And we're starting with Missa.
We currently have a binary political system in our country, and we need to kind of break the binary. I think the younger generation is very good about breaking the binary and more fluid in that. Instant runoff voting would help people achieve that, so that way we are not staying within that binary. We know that different opinions, even if they are not the ones you agree with, are important to a healthy democracy. Actually, I find that the more conservative people I talk to generate the more interesting questions for me to ponder and to find commonality. So I think in order to strengthen the democracy, we need to kind of get rid of this binary, and instant runoff voting would be one of them. I think there was a second part to that question, but I might have forgotten it. These are, nope.
Making voting easily accessible.
Oh, yes. And yeah, make sure, and actually, so the second part would be to, incentivize paid time off so people can have access to go vote during the workday.
So one of the many remarkable things about Vermont is the access we have in this state to elected officials, to leaders, to people who are involved in our democratic process. I think it's really special that I can go to the grocery store and Bernie Sanders is buying a steak and in line in front of me, for example. So that said, there are a couple of thoughts. One is I do think a properly designed instant runoff voting system could be beneficial to our system. And the second is I think campaign finance is something that should be looked at. And there's some interesting models that use sort of small donor public financing that potentially could work. Take some of the big money out of politics while also still fulfilling, being constitutional based on the Citizens United case. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you both. So it is time for audience questions. Any questions you may have? Evelyn, who's at the front of the room, has a microphone, so that way Town Meeting TV can pick up those questions, but would love if one or more of you would want to stand up and ask a question. It looks like we got one right here. And sir, if you just say your name while you ask the question, that'd be great too.
Hi, my name is Andy Goda. My question is about climate. And the federal government brings a lot of money to bear on climate, and one of those areas in particular as of late is the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's a relationship between the state and the federal government with these types of dollars. So how do you see the role of a legislator in bringing these federal dollars to bear on climate?
Great. And I think, Abby, you're first.
Great. Thank you for the question. So I think this really brings up that concept of legislative oversight that we talked about, where the legislature really has a role to oversee how the administration is implementing policies, including things that are coming from the federal government. The Inflation Reduction Act includes about $58 million for Vermont to help low and moderate income families, electrify by heat pumps, really move into sort of the climate economy, and weatherize their homes as well. That has not been rolled out yet in Vermont. It has in about 5 other states, including New York. Last week, I sent a letter to the Department of Public Service, to the commissioner, asking her for an update on when will this money be rolled out for Vermonters to take advantage of it. If it's not implemented by the time the legislature starts, I would push for a hearing to look into it. Like, why has this not been rolled out for Vermonters? Another example is Solar for All, which was supported and championed by Bernie Sanders, which will bring over $60 million for low and moderate income Vermonters to install solar. And again, that was expected to be rolled out in September, but it hasn't. So the legislature really needs to have that, as a critical role, is to have that oversight.
These are new topics to learn more about, and I would have to say that I'm not that well versed in the knowledge of these funds as my prepared colleague for this question. And so there's a lot to learn there, but in hearing more about that, my responses to that is I would wonder, as Vermonters, what is really looking at the income limits so we can capture the low middle income to incentivize electrifying, getting rebates for electrical vehicles, electric bikes, that sort of thing. I also think about again, the weatherization program and what are the barriers that are in place there in order to get weatherization programs. In terms of overall climate, we really kind of have to look at reducing. And again, that goes with insulation and that sort of thing in buildings. And when we're doing new projects, Abby's talked about oversight a little bit, and as an architect, I know that when we build a new building, we have an energy code that everybody's supposed to follow, but there's lack of oversight in terms of actually the implementation of that energy code, and I think it's a pretty big gap that needs to get filled. So right now, Efficiency Vermont can go and inspect a building, and they will help, but not in Burlington. So we need a little bit of oversight for making sure that when we do weatherize a home or a building, that it's done properly in order to get incentives. So.
Thank you. We got a question behind you, Evelyn.
Transportation as a theme. So a lot of federal dollars passed down to the state to V-Trans specifically. So I'm kind of curious, thinking about that, GMT, Green Mountain Transit, just announced, $3 million in potential route cuts and big things. We know we need to get people out of single occupancy vehicles who are able to, and really focusing on those town centers. I'd love to hear a little more about what are your thoughts related to our transportation system relationship with V-Trans or federal dollars to the state level. And my second question, which is easier, is if you could pick any committee, because I know you get two, two is in sentence. I'm still writing all this stuff myself. Which committee would you be on if you could choose? You can pick any question to start with.
Oh, excellent. And I think Miss, I'll go first.
As far as the committee, I'm not really sure. I would actually want to investigate them all pretty thoroughly to really see where I would be most useful. Economic division was sort of my first thinking, but housing is also another. I have a lot of knowledge there. So in terms of Green Mountain Transit, I'm a bus rider. I have my card. We are a single vehicle household, and they are cutting bus route. Riding the bus is inconvenient. That's just the way it is. They're often late, and you have to plan your schedule tightly around it. The more frequently they can run, the easier it is. When during COVID we had free fares, and more people were riding the bus, and it was just easy to hop on and hop off, not think about what was in my pocket. Can I ride the bus? So we need to do more of that, and we need to electrify the fleet as well. I was the architect who re-roofed the GMTA building, and I know for a fact it's about an acre building, and there's no solar on the top of that building. And what a great place to put solar to solar power those buses. So there's a lot of things we can do, and I think it has to also look at the infrastructure for those buses to make sure that people. So not only are we charging them in the locations in which they're stored, so we're not losing that energy, but that we provide more routes so people can access them in more rural places.
Thank you for the questions. For the committee, when I was appointed in the spring, part of the reason I was interested in going on the list to potentially be appointed was because I thought I had a lot to add to the committee that at least, for the end of the session I would be on, which is commerce and economic development. So I'd like to stay there. I think I have a lot to offer in terms of perspective, and as a small employer, and as somebody who has started a business from scratch and kind of built it through all the different levels. So, my very brief time on there, I really like the people, I like the work. I think there's interesting work, and there's work that I can really kind of dive into and become an expert on. As far as transportation, I also do ride the bus, but mostly, especially if it's nice, I try to ride my electric bike to commute. And so I'm not super familiar about the rules with a lot of that federal money coming into for transportation money, but I would certainly advocate and want as much as possible that money is rooted towards projects that support getting people out of single occupancy vehicles. So, bike lanes, bicycles, public transportation. I mean, not long ago we were all frustrated that GMT was bringing fares back, right? But now we're honestly worried that they're going to survive at all. So the bus and our public transportation is absolutely critical. And a really important thing for Vermont to do, again, we have 645,000 people, is to leverage federal money. I mean, that is how we can do the projects that we want to be able to do, the big projects, the important projects, is we need to leverage federal money to help us get there. So the exact specifics, I'm not sure, but I definitely, I would want to see money coming towards the kinds of transportation that help us get us towards our climate goals.
Thank you for that question. Thanks for the answers. Any other audience questions? I see Tom.
Hi, Tom Hughes. We're 29 days out from the most important election in anybody's lifetime, one of the most important elections in your lifetimes. And we are here in Burlington, which, despite all of its remarkable charms, has some of the lowest voter turnout in the state. Do you have any ideas for increasing voter turnout in Burlington?
Thank you, Tom. Abby, I think you're first.
Okay. That's interesting. I did not know that Burlington had a particularly low turnout. I sure hope we have a high turnout for the coming election. I think we're hoping for 75 to 80%, but not we want that obviously to be higher. I mean, I think mailing ballots to all voters is certainly a good start. I mean, we saw in the primary what happens when you don't mail ballots to voters is not very many people vote. And they also got very confused, I think, because they were getting used to getting ballots in the mail. There are, I'm not sure the technology behind it, but there's got to be better ways for remote voting that is secure and that we can utilize. I mean, there are countries where voting is not optional. Everybody votes. In Australia, for example, it is not. You are required to vote, which I think is an interesting direction. So apart from those things, I'm not really sure how we get people to vote, but there's really nothing more important than I agree with you that the coming election is the most important election of our lifetimes.
I'm going to take it on a little different path, but I think the way we get people to vote is we get people engaged in politics. And I think, I had never saw myself coming into this role, getting into politics. And I think a lot of people don't feel that they can make change, that their voice is going to be heard. And then makes people not want to go out and vote. And I think we need to start making policy approachable, even starting in elementary school, so that way kids can also feel like, oh, I understand property tax. And that's, I think, one of the things that I'm trying to do is like, how can we demystify policy so that way it eliminates the barrier so that I can engage with it. If I can engage with policy and understand it, and it's not something out there, then I want to be involved and I want to go out and vote. So I think that's the way we incentivize people to go out and vote, is really kind of break down the barriers to policy and make it approachable for folks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, we've got one right here.
Hi, my name is Sam. My question, and I know we've talked a lot about this, but as a young person, the climate crisis is obviously paramount for me. What do you guys think is the most important specific piece of legislation that the legislature can pass next session to address this crisis?
Thank you. Missa?
I don't have any specific legislation pieces. If you have one in mind, I'd love to hear it. Or if anybody in this room has one in mind, I'd love to hear it. Besides, we need to continue to work on looking at all the intersections of policy. We can't isolate climate action policy from housing. And we can't separate it from healthcare. Those are you have to look at them in unison and together and move them together in unison. So when you say what one policy item, I don't think there is one policy item. Again, I've mentioned before, like housing is healthcare, and healthcare is closely related to our community safety and getting people off of the street. And the way in which we house people can also change people's mental health. So, for example, if you had a large square building with a corridor without any windows versus a donut-shaped building where there is some windows on the inside, that changes it has a ripple effect. So stay with me here. It changes the mental health of the person occupying the space, but it also changes the energy use, creating daylight into the space, which then reduces the amount of energy load that you put in. So all of these things are interlinked. So it's not just one piece, but you have to look at it holistically.
Well, if we're looking at the top two drivers of climate change, which is in Vermont, it's the thermal sector, well, transportation and the thermal sector. We have an opportunity going into the legislature this year to implement a clean heat standard if it comes to the legislature in a way that can be implemented. And I think that the standard can be implemented in a way that there's, sort of off-ramp, so to speak, in case it's not able to meet its cost objectives. But I think really diving into the clean heat standard is very important for this session. And the second piece is kind of going back to what Christina was talking about, which is transportation. And how do we get more people out of their single occupancy vehicles? How do we make sure that our bus system is robust and goes to enough places? Those are, and I think fundamentally it's really about looking at those greenhouse gas emissions and looking at our targets, looking at the 2030 targets and beyond, and doing everything we can right now to reduce emissions.
Great. Not seeing any other questions, so we will move to the concluding thoughts of the candidates, final statements, and we will start with Abby. 2 minutes. And Evelyn is going to get in position to do some timekeeping again. So 1 second. Here you go, Abby.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for the opportunity and for being here to listen. I feel like this sort of moment, I'm bringing along all of the experiences, all of the things I've learned in my 54 years on this planet. And I believe that the legislature is a place that I can use all of those things that I've learned. I want to give back to my community. I want to use all these lessons to help strengthen Vermont small businesses, working families, and communities. I'm proud to be the Democratic nominee. And and I hope you will vote for me. I think that what I bring to this is the experience of needing to understand a lot of information quickly and understand what's important and to ask really good questions and to understand that we need to learn and adapt and we cannot let perfection get in the way of progress. So I will work hard as a legislator, and I will work very hard to find those paths where we can make progress. It's not going to be perfect, but we can make progress. And we can constantly this is how I always ran my business. You make a decision, you move forward, and then you step back and you take a look at it, and then you adjust, and then you keep moving forward. And that is how I will approach the work in the legislature as well.
I'm excited to bring forth, I think, a unique skill set into the Vermont legislature. I'm a visual thinker, and I will have to say that written laws feel overwhelming. And I think that I am not alone in that, even for the non-visual thinkers out there. The way in which law is written and presented is overwhelming. And I think my skill set is really to kind of break down those pieces to make it approachable, so that way, again, we can all participate in policymaking. I think the way in which we engage the public with policy is not enough. It creates a barrier so that people, again, they don't understand it and they won't engage with it. So if we can work towards demystifying policy in a way that is data-driven, nonpartisan, relationship building, then we can make progress. The goal is to create a roadmap and then make practical steps to get to the final destination. and that looks at how you would look at, you have to make sure that you're thinking about budget and needs and revenue in that. So that's the skill set I hope to bring. Go on my website and take a look at the other policy panels that I've made, like this one. I did a couple on one on community safety, gun safety. I have one on affordability coming out soon. And that I look forward to everyone voting.
All right, that is the end of our forum. I want to thank both candidates, both Missa Aloisi, Representative Abby Duke. Thank you so much for both being here and stepping up and agreeing to run. It's really important to have candidates who are willing to serve their communities. The most important message is vote November 5th, or vote mail-in before November 5th. It's really important that we have as many people in the process as possible to make sure that we have a strong democracy. Want to thank you as an audience for being with us tonight on a beautiful fall evening. I want to thank our partner organizations, Vermont Conservation Voters, VPIRG, Vermont Education Association, and Rights and Democracy for helping sponsor this. You can find more information about most of the issues we talked about tonight on their websites. And have a great night, everybody.